I think it's because my ice is melting.
Cheers.
And a little off.
What is it? It's not even 5 o'clock. I'm glad my wife's not home from work. She knows, you smell like liquor. Honey, it's for work. Bar's half the name of the company. Like you said.
Time, Prot, come by.
Bye.
So, with limited editions, with Redbar or publications like ourselves, is there anything that you would want to see a publication or a collaborator do with a watch brand that you haven't seen yet?
I think if you had asked me this even like 2 or 3 years ago, I might have had an answer. But what's interesting now is, I'm guilty of this too, but like everybody and their grandmother has done a collaboration with everybody else's grandmother. And I'm not knocking that, because I think it's great. The more the merrier. If something doesn't tickle your particular fancy, wait a week. There'll be something else. But I think people have done some pretty interesting collabs. Some are a little, more obvious than others. Some, like ours, are, not too crazy, depending on what the original model is supposed to be. But I have to say, I've been pretty impressed. What you guys have done with Zenith, I think, is wonderful. But that's a good question. And if you're asking me, I'll throw it back at you. What do you want to see? Maybe that you haven't seen.
I think the best thing that we can do as part of the niche is, I think sometimes the watch community is a little harsh on what brands do. And they're like, for example, when certain watches have a 430 date window or what have you, and they're thinking about what the purists within the minority think versus what the mainstream wants. More often than not, people want a date on their watch and they're not really that concerned or fussed with where it's positioned. So I think that let brands be successful with what they know will work for the mainstream, so that when these collaboration opportunities arise, we can step in and kind of create the watch at that smaller scale for the purists, so that there aren't, thousands and thousands of pieces of inventory that might really speak to the watch community, but are sitting on a shelf, versus some of the more mainstream stuff that will sell for these brands. Because ultimately, if the brands are successful, then they're more willing to play around and have fun with us when we, come up with an idea, or even they come up with an idea and approach us, however it goes. So I think that's what we do in terms of these collaboration limited editions, is we fill that void of, like, we bring that extra perspective where we're a little removed from it because we're not manufacturers ourselves, but we're also in it enough in terms of being in the community and in the industry where we can kind of have our finger on the pulse and figure out, what do true watch geeks want to see in a limited edition watch from brand X or brand Y?
You make a great point. And I think, now that you're saying that, we do sort of have a responsibility, like, to try to make that, like you said, that purist watch. And, this was a couple of years back, and I was talking to an executive with a brand, and I have a watch from them that's, it was a very small run, and maybe the collector darling, the case size is right, no date, retro, whatever. And, so many people were like, oh my God, I love this watch. Why don't they make this? Why don't they make this? This is bullshit. And so I was talking about it. It's interesting. The response for this watch is great. And why don't you? And he said, exactly what you said. It's like, look, if our collection, everything was tailored to what the community wants, we'd be out of business in 5 minutes. And I think we forget that sometimes, that as collectors, as purists, we have a very set idea of what that ideal watch is, and it does not jive. Like you said, most people want a date. If I showed the average Joe the watch I'm talking about, they'd be like, hey, that's great, but there's no date. Like, where's the date? Okay, well, it doesn't have one because traditionally you wouldn't have needed for its purpose. And like, okay, that's great, but, I'm not piloting a fighter jet. I'm not diving to the bottom of the ocean. I'm literally crossing the street and going to work, and I'd kind of like to have a date. So you do have to balance that, but you're right. Then we have an opportunity. But then the flip side of that is that you don't make enough of them. And now, things sell out, in a minute, and then people are mad about that. So I don't think you can win, but I like the idea of more opportunities, to make these pieces. And we've got, a couple in the pipeline that I think will, hit that note for collectors as well. Not, just the watch today, which it's driving me nuts that I don't have it, because I just want to hang out in a dark room in a UV light with it. I know that sounded really bad when I
Well,
said
you know,
that.
keep the UV light away from the couch. No.
I was gonna say I'll go in the bathroom within, just, no, you don't want to use the UV light in the bathroom. Not my bathroom.
But no, it's funny. Like on the subject of like purity, we talk about the brands being more conservative for the mainstream, and then we fill this void. But then we do see other situations where Audemars Piguet with Marvel and Travis Scott. Then you've got TAG Heuer and Kith, TAG Heuer and Super Mario. And there's sometimes is this pushback where people are like, what the hell? This doesn't align with my purist sensibilities. You're destroying the brand.
I was guilty of that. I was guilty of that with the Heuer collaboration. First of all, I was just a little put off by the disingenuity, so to speak, of a particular video done with the creator of Kith hyping his original watch, and then 5 minutes later, oh look who's doing a limited edition with TAG Heuer. But that was a watch that I had back in college, and so I felt like a special kinship, and I'm like, look at how they massacred my boy. Like, how did you put Kith on it, and then you have the opportunity to put a lume dial and you didn't, and you're charging $1,500, and I'm losing my mind. But at the end of the day, it actually makes sense. It makes sense for TAG Heuer. It wasn't meant for me. That watch was not meant for me. And sometimes we get a little pissed, like it should be. Everything should be meant for me. A little bit of that ego gets in there. And I was in high dudgeon about it until I had a chance to cool off. And I'm like, first of all, I can buy an original one on eBay for $400 in decent condition. So I haven't yet. Why? Well, it's a little too small for me. The new ones, which I think they did right by keeping the case size close to the original. But just because I don't like that Kith branding on it, I'm literally an old guy with a cane yelling at kids to get off my lawn.
Sorry, I call this phenomenon horological hooliganism because I was watching that show Welcome to Wrexham, and there was a whole episode.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that. Football? Horological hooliganism.
Sometimes I feel like
track.
Sometimes I feel like
hooliganism,
which is getting bigger and bigger, but it's still not the broader marketplace, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes there are these really loud and aggressive takes that happen from the outset when something's debuted. But now that we're sort of in the wake of it, because the reality is these Kith watches, they're all sold, and they sold like
they're gone.
So irrefutably, it's not subject to opinion. It was a good thing for TAG to do because they sold it out, right? From a business standpoint, they sold it out. But what's interesting is when you say like, oh, like I wish they did a lume dial. Well, you wish they would have done a lume dial, but you don't like the Kith branding. But ultimately now there's still a door where without the Kith branding, they do a lume dial that's just strictly TAG.
That's what I'm hoping that's what I'm hoping happens here, is that this is sort of the opening salvo and paving the way to actually have it become part of the collection, without the, Kith ephemera on it. And then that's for the rest of us. But it does introduce the brand, I think, to a demographic that maybe doesn't really look at watches so much. Maybe it's the hype beasts, the kids in the streetwear and all that other stuff. And they've got a couple nickels to rub together and they want to have something cool. Oh my God, look what Kith is doing. And then they'll wear the watch. Maybe they love it, maybe whatever. But now they're actually thinking about watches. Maybe their next watch is a TAG. Maybe it's not, but maybe they don't care ultimately. But could bring some people in. It makes sense. You don't need to preach to me because that's preaching to the choir. So I get it. Now I was just upset because I really was like, hey, if they bring it out for $1,000 and my lume dial and everything's perfect, would I have still bought it? Well, I guess not. With a kid, again, I haven't said before, my son's going to college. I'm not allowed to buy anything now.
Yeah.
But yeah. No, there's nothing.
No.
I'm lucky she's letting me get this watch.
Yeah. Well, we always have to get there's two sorts of allocations. There's allocations from the boutique and there's allocations from our partners allowing us to receive these allocations. But
exactly.
No, look, I definitely get that there was some contention about the price of the Kith being at 1,500, and it's not speaking from any sort of context of what the watch itself is, and yes, 100%, it's still sold. But I think as well, there were some people that were hoping that TAG would sort of offer up a kind of level alternative to the Moonswatch, whereas it's in a different tier.
Yeah.
You know,
I think, but in retrospect, I think they're wise not to do that. But again, that would have been interesting, shall we say?
Yeah, it's easy for a brand like Swatch to do that at a larger scale because it doesn't diminish sort of the cachet of Swatch to have a lot of bioceramic watches out there.
Yeah.
For TAG, if all of a sudden you start going crazy and every month, depending on the phase of the moon, there's a new Formula One, you can't have that for a brand like TAG Heuer. And that's the other thing that I think is very successful about this Kith launch is this idea that as much as we don't like this factor of it as watch people, it raises the brand cachet by having their moment in the spotlight in the more lifestyle arena. And if the TAG Heuer brand is propped up and considered more sought after or hyped up, for lack of a better phrase, then for everybody that owns a TAG watch, there is a benefit, because if more attention goes to their watches, prices on the secondary go up for their watches. I'm not saying necessarily they're on retail, but they go up, right?
Right.
So in that way, there's benefit as well. There's nothing wrong with the brand as a side quest. It's not the main campaign to have this sort of effort that raises awareness of what the brand is and what they do, even if it's not their core offering. But at least now more people are aware of who TAG Heuer are, and I think that's a win.
No, it makes sense in retrospect, and I think again I was just offended because how dare you not make this watch exactly for me and my sensibility and my taste? I mean, the nerve of them. I have a half a mind to march off to Paris right now and knock on the Arnaud's door, tell them, hey, make my watch. So, but that's another point. That's why I hope to see them come out. I think it's a great line collection. A lot of people, again, that horological hooliganism, band or whatever, they'll, say, oh, well, it was a crappy watch back then. The colors are blah, blah, blah. It's cheap. I don't like it. But I always loved the F1. And maybe it was because I had one back in the day, but I still think the design is solid for today. I think it's fun, and I would love to see that become part of their collection.
Yeah, it's a catch-22 in the sense of anybody who doesn't have the limited edition is upset that they like it but can't have it. But then if everybody can have it, you don't like it as much because there isn't that sort of coveted, like, I have something other people can't have.
I'm guilty of that.
I'm wearing the Shun right now, right?
Oh.
So the SBGA 413, and this is a watch that originally was a U.S. exclusive. And when it became, there we go. When it became,
I don't know why I was sitting right there, but
when it became super popular, eventually Grand Seiko's like, you know what, it's too good, and we'll release it to the world. Now, there's two ways to go after that happens. One is to be like, those bastards, like, I had this U.S. exclusive and now it's no longer exclusive. Or you could be like me, where I'm like, oh, awesome, now my friends in Europe can buy this watch they saw on my wrist and really liked. Like, I think it's unfortunate when things are limited that you look at the design and go like, oh, that would have been a great core collection model, especially when it's something like a blue dial, right? But for things that are more out there, whether it's salmon or purple, things that, as much as we might want them to do it, they're not going to sort of stick their necks out and produce such an out there color at that mass, more larger scale.
It's
I'll take the limited edition over not having it at all. I'd rather have 100 pieces than 0 pieces, right? So yeah, I don't know. That's where I land on that.
I've moved beyond that. I think there was a period where I like the idea of if I have a particular watch and no one else can have it and it's worth more, and yay. But I've grown more egalitarian and generous in my old age, shall we say. And I do remember when they, finally said, we're going to release this to the world. And, look, maybe the original plan was to keep the Shunbun as a U.S. only, and they felt probably going to be a niche piece. I mean, it's pink after all, although very subtle shade. And when they saw how popular it was like, all right, let's do this. And some people were upset. I thought, like you, great. The more the merrier. It's such a fantastic watch. It shouldn't be limited to one market. So now I love the idea of everyone can have everything, but it's not practical for a lot of designs.
Because I think that's where watchmaking is at its best, is when it is a bit more democratized, when we have micro brands coming in offering elevated products that are comparable to the more high end. Of course, they're not necessarily finished to the same degree, but they sort of strike that same chord. When you have, things that aren't as limited in nature or more fairly raffled, let's say, like the Mad One, where they learn from the first time around for the later raffles. That's where it's at its best, because we're always going to have the big three that are just pure unobtainium, and that's not going to change.
Yep.
At least I don't see it changing. So when other brands come to the forefront and say, look, we're making quality stuff, and we're not concerned with meeting that criteria, we'd rather just make sure that people are able to buy our watches and be happy with them. That's where
what
watches
an odd
are.
Concept. Yeah, to let people buy a watch and be happy. That can't work. That's madness. But yeah, the three brands that we won't name. Are you listening?
All right, Adam. Pleasure as always.
Okay, thank you, Zach. And all right, well, let's. Wow, that was
one last cheers.
Cool. Come on.